Hello. Today we have with us a prominent journalist and the consulting editor of Himal South Asian and the head of Hiri Institute of Research and Exchange. Here, Laxmi Murthy ma'am with us today. Ma'am, we're very pleased to have you today with us. So, some questions for you. Um, why did you choose a topic like conflict areas of press freedom, gender, to be talked about?
I think I wanted to talk about these issues because they are less talked about. And one of the ideas, I started working in journalism, doing stories on gender, doing stories on marginalized communities. And the idea was to give voice to their issues, which doesn't find a place in mainstream press. And likewise with freedom of expression issues, I think there's a bit of a myth that India, being a democracy, there's totally a free press and everybody can say whatever they want. But more and more one is coming to know now. Of course, it's very much out in the open. But even for the past 10 or 15 years, there's been very clear no-go areas on what you can and cannot speak about, the depth to which you can speak about something or not. So I think these were issues which appeal to me in terms of campaigning. I'm also working with the International Federation of Journalists, and the campaigns we do there are looking at gender equity, looking at press freedom, and impunity for those who commit crimes against journalists. In fact, there's a big campaign launched on 2nd of November because, again, it's assumed that in a democracy such issues don't exist. But in India, for example, there's not been a prosecution of a single perpetrator who's killed a journalist, not even one. So obviously there's a systemic problem here, and the media is seen as, it's the kill the messenger kind of situation, and there isn't enough of a systemic redressal to this problem, which is why I'm interested to work in it.
And then, what similarities or differences you find, in the freedom of expression in women in Nepal and India?
I mean, again, there are similarities and differences. In South Asia, there's a lot of similarity because of a shared colonial history. So a lot of the laws are the same. A lot of the cultural issues are similar. In Nepal, it's a newer democracy. There's been years and years now of political instability, and women have always been at the forefront. So I think that is a huge similarity everywhere across South Asia, that women uh, are in the forefront of every democratic movement without exception, I think. Uh, and the filter, once the movement becomes more stable in terms of decision making, again women fall back. But in Nepal, there's been a very conscious attempt in the Constituent Assembly, in every political body, in every administrative body, even in unions. There's a Federation of Nepali Journalists, and they've made a very conscious effort to have inclusiveness and representation. So there's representation of women, of indigenous people, of Dalits, of marginalized communities. So in Nepal, this is a very big issue which is not taken as seriously in India. In India, it's assumed that everybody will come up and do their thing, or if given the opportunity. About reservation also, there's a lot of anti reservation feeling, and there's an assumption that there's no need for affirmative action. The fact that in India the representation in Parliament, it's been hanging fire for so long. The 33% reservation. There's a lot of hostility to, in a way, sharing the decision-making pie, and that seems to be a little less in Nepal. There's a consciousness that you have to do something positive and take positive steps in order to redress old inequalities. And it's a very new democracy, and there's a lot of consciousness about this. There's a lot of, many issues to do with the democratic process, but there seems to be more of a recognition of this.
know, the head of the Institute of Exchange and Research and Exchange, like what issues do you feel like, while interacting to the, the cross-border conflicts and, while talking to the people?
Actually, in this, we don't talk so much to the people. It's really taking forward long form journalism because Himal, one of the unique aspects of Himal is long form journalism. And we do pieces of 5,000 and 8,000 words, which generally, even in magazines now, there's this whole perception that people want shorter pieces, their attention span is, very low and so on. But the long pieces we find have a great readership. So the Re-Institute was actually set up to look and do more long form and investigative pieces, and also to be a platform for discussions on issues which are not commonly discussed in South Asia. So we just had a conference, for example, on drone warfare, and had human rights activists and experts coming in from Pakistan, Afghanistan, and looking at what it means to have the US or allied forces, doing drone surveillance or drone warfare in Afghanistan and Pakistan. What does it mean to us as a region? So these are the kind of issues we do look at, which are quite sensitive in terms of a political stand.
Like, can you tell us like some of your experiences? How, like, any difficulties that you face, or was it, you tried to how to get into such in-depth reporting?
Difficulties, actually, that's the thing with age, the difficulties sort of start fading into the background. But I think we started writing at a time when things were not as accessible, information was not as accessible. So, there's no Google and there are no phones and, all of this. So, actually, legging it around, getting information, pursuing stories, and that carried with it its own vulnerabilities and risks. It's not that now there are no risks or anything, but things have changed. There are different types of risks, I guess. And I mean, of course, moving around with a mobile phone, you feel connected, and any problem you can call. But at the same time, mobile phones and Facebook and all this brings with it the issue of trolling and online harassment. So it's not that problems are less. I think it's just that problems have changed, and there is now, I think, more of an atmosphere of acceptance. Earlier, women were still seen as people who would only be doing a certain kind of story.
About the book, Our Pictures, Our Words, the experience, like, because you've written it with the Rajshri Das Gupta ma'am, like, how did you feel, like, writing it together with her?
Actually, it was a lovely experience because we're very good friends, and we're sort of co-travelers in the women's movement. And we're from a generation where the autonomous women's movement was coming into its own in the 80s. So it was like, in a way, writing our own history. It was very much part of what we were all part of, and a lot of the posters and slogans we were part of creating. So it was an interesting process of, stepping back and looking at it as history, yet it's very much our own lives. So that was very interesting.
You've been an active member in the women's movement. Like, how far, like, the movement have been successful in addressing women's issues in the South Asia?
It's successful in some ways, and there's a long way to go. So I wouldn't really like to see it in terms of a success and failure. I think you look at it like a long journey and a long road, and how far have we come. So I think we have come, we're pushed back at times, but we just keep plodding on. And again, it's one of those journeys which never end. So if you look at it as a goal and how much have you achieved, I think you're bound to be frustrated. But if you look at it as a journey and we're moving forward, sometimes we stop, but most of the time we're moving. And I think we're moving. It's the fact that you're sitting here interviewing me, I think that's a movement.
How important do you think is the role of oral history in documenting women's struggles and their stories?
I think it's really important. I think it's very, very important. And it is one of the techniques to actually record histories, narratives, and stories of communities that are not so, uh, you know, familiar, not even familiar. They don't use the written archiving as much. So I think women, indigenous people, these are communities, Dalits, where you need to actually emphasize a lot. And through Zuban, we were collecting these oral histories of women from the movement. And it's very striking because when we were doing this, we were thinking, the histories are getting lost. And out of many of the people we interviewed, some have passed away just in this much time because, they were of an elder age group. So we're literally losing histories because as activists, we were not very good at documenting while we were doing things. We would just do them. So while doing, you need to actually be documenting and writing. Now people are getting better at it, I think. But those days, it was all about doing. It was not about writing. So a lot of history is actually in people's heads, and I think one needs to be getting it out and sharing in public because it's a very rich history which will just get lost.
Okay, and some advice for a young aspiring journalist, who is in the field, and sometimes we don't know how to, try and make an impact or write something, which can, create some awareness for people. So, some advice for us.
Advice, I wouldn't call it advice because I think we need to take some advice from young people. I think it should be the other way around. Young people should be telling the older ones, okay, make way and we are coming there. And I think what you need really is just follow your gut and follow your heart, follow your conscience, and just follow your instinct and be confident. I think that's what's going to get you somewhere.
Any future projects, ma'am, that is coming up for?
There's lots of stuff in the air, but yeah, you guys start doing projects and call us.
Thank you so much, ma'am, to have you here. Hope you enjoyed your stay in Hyderabad.